Hello everyone, I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The village in the Carpathian Mountains. It was during my second year at university when I joined the Walking and Hiking Society, a group whose name sounded deceptively tame, but often led us to some of the most thrilling and surreal destinations in the world. That year, the trip would take us deep into the Carpathian Mountains, a place where mist lingers like old spirits in forests, whisper ancient secrets to those foolish enough to listen. For those unfamiliar, the Carpathians stretch across Central and Eastern Europe, though their heart beats strongest in Romania. These rugged peaks cradled vast, unbroken forests, home to brown bears, wolves, and lynx. But the wildlife wasn't what unnerved me most during that trip. It wasn't the sound of howling at night, or the claw marks on tree trunks. It was the people we met, or perhaps the things masquerading as people, that haunted my dreams long after we came home. We'd ventured into the Retezat Mountains National Park, and at some point, our group lost the trail. George, our young and capable guide, insisted it wasn't serious. With a map, compass, and supplies, seasoned hikers don't truly get lost. They merely improvise. But as the day wore on, the forest seemed to press closer. The sky darkened, heavy with the threat of snow, though the season said otherwise. And in the distance, somewhere among the trees, we kept hearing faint, rhythmic sounds, like chanting carried on the breeze. Our supplies were dwindling. We'd planned to resupply at small villages along the route, but missing a stop meant we were left with only a few scraps of food and some water. Fatigue gnawed at us. That's when George and another hiker went scouting and returned with strange news. They'd spotted smoke spiraling above the tree, a village hidden in the folds of the mountains. It wasn't marked on any of our maps, yet the smoke was real, drifting into the cold sky like a beacon. Relief swept over the group. We imagined warm meals and kind faces, an oasis in the wilderness. As we approached, we noticed the houses, wooden structures, weathered and crooked, as if they had grown out of the earth itself. The villagers stood watching us from doorways and windows. Some smiled, toothless and wide-eyed, while others stared blankly, their expressions vacant as though staring into some unseen abyss. Their hospitality was strange. The headman, a gaunt figure with a long coat and hands like gnarled roots, welcomed us and offered food. We devoured goat meat, potatoes, and milk with a desperation that overrode caution. Yet something about the milk's taste lingered unpleasantly on my tongue, though I couldn't name why. Around us, the villagers whispered to one another in a dialect none of us recognized, their eyes darting between us and the encroaching nightfall. When George asked for directions to the mountain pass, the headman only shook his head, gesturing for us to stay until morning. But unease spread among us. Some of the girls in the group had noticed the younger men staring at them with dark hunger in their eyes. The decision was made. We would leave and camp elsewhere, even if it meant sleeping under the cold stars. We thanked them, offering payment for their help, and turned back into the forest as the last rays of light fled behind the peaks. That night, as the wind howled through the trees and the embers of our campfire glowed faintly, we tried to rest, but a sound woke me, soft footsteps crunching over frostbitten leaves. My tentmate's voice shook as she whispered, "Put your boots on." Outside, George stood tense, calling out into the darkness. His voice was steady but strained. "Do you speak English? Are you from the village? We're leaving in the morning. We don't want trouble." There was no answer. But then, faint beams of light, flashlights, or perhaps lanterns, appeared on the ridgeline above. Figures loomed in the shadows, 4 or 5 at least, though perhaps more beyond what we could see. They watched us in silence, their lights piercing the gloom. Our group stirred uneasily. No one spoke. Then, as if on cue, the lights blinked out, and the sound of boots crunching on stone faded into stillness. We didn't sleep after that. At first light, we packed and fled toward the pass. By afternoon, we stumbled into a bustling village on the other side of the mountain, a place alive with color and laughter. Over plum brandy in a warm tavern, we recounted our strange encounter. The bartender, a wiry man with sharp eyes, froze when we mentioned the village. "There are no settlements on that side," he said flatly. "Not anymore." The old mountain villages, they were cleared decades ago during the communist era. We protested. We'd eaten their food, seen their faces. But his expression never changed. "Then who did you see?" he asked, his voice dropping low. "Perhaps it was them, what's left of them, or what they became." He leaned closer, his breath heavy with brandy. "The old stories say they survived, but not like us. They turned on each other when the winters grew too long. They kept their line alive the only way they could, and fed on those too weak to endure. Some say they still wander the forests, waiting for lost travelers." I tried to laugh, to shake off the chill that settled in my bones, but my stomach churned at the memory of the goat milk we'd been given, and the glassy-eyed villagers staring through us as if we weren't real. Even now, years later, I wonder about the lights that night. Were they human, or was something far older and hungrier watching from the ridgeline, waiting for the dark to fall? Story 2. The Vanishing of Jacob Gray. On a crisp April morning in 2017, Jacob Gray set off on a journey that would soon dissolve into whispers and shadows. At just 22 years old, he was an adventurer at heart, a cyclist seeking solitude in the emerald depths of Olympic National Park. His bike, a silver specialized hard rock, groaned under the weight of a trailer packed with camping gear. The road ahead was empty, save for towering firs swaying like silent sentinels in the breeze. A woman passing in her car saw him pedaling along Solduck Hot Springs Road later that day. She remembered his bright redand yellow trailer, how oddly cheerful it looked against the grey, overcast sky. Hours later, she noticed the trailer again, abandoned on the roadside. The bicycle rested nearby, leaning awkwardly against a tree, as though its rider had been plucked from the earth. The rangers who discovered the scene found it strange. A bough lay on the ground. Several arrows were jammed into the dirt, some buried deep as though fired with force. Stranger still, the trailer had puncture holes where arrows had pierced its canvas sides. It was as though someone, or something, had been shooting at it. But there was no sign of Jacob. Search teams swept the forest, their voices echoing between moss-dropped trees. They found faint footprints leading toward the riverbank. A set of tracks suggested Jacob had swapped his boots for running shoes before venturing into the woods. One print near the river's edge looked as though he'd slipped. Further downstream, muddy handprints hinted that he'd pulled himself out of the icy water. But beyond that, there was only silence. For days, volunteers scoured the park with dogs and helicopters. Flyers with Jacob's photograph fluttered from kiosks and trees, their edges curling in the damp wind. His parents refused to give up. They believed he was still alive, waiting somewhere deep in the wilderness. Weeks passed, then months. A year later, in August of 2018, a team of biologists stumbled upon human remains on a remote ridge 15 miles from where Jacob's bike was found. His wallet and tattered clothing lay nearby, along with his Bible, its pages yellowed and damp, but untouched by fire or blade. The official report called it a tragic accident. Hypothermia, they said. Jacob had climbed too far into the snowbound peaks and succumbed to the cold. But in the quiet hours, questions surfaced like restless spirits. Why abandon the bike and trailer, leaving most of his food and supplies behind? Why carry the Bible, so carefully protected, as though it were a shield? And what of the arrows fired into his gear? The locals whispered their own theories. Some said Jacob had been hunted. Others spoke of ancient spirits that roamed the Olympic forests, luring wanderers off their paths. And there was the river, the one Jacob had almost fallen into. Old legends warn of creatures that dwell beneath its surface, their pale hands reaching for ankles in the dark. Perhaps Jacob felt those hands. Perhaps he fled not from hunger or cold, but from eyes watching him between the trees. The bow and arrows had always been his, but the angle of the shots into the dirt suggested a chase, not practice, not play. Someone, or something, had been firing at him. When they found his body, there were no obvious wounds, no broken bones. But by then, there was little flesh left to examine. The forest is a patient predator. It keeps its secrets well. In my dreams, I see Jacob climbing, his breath frosting in the thin mountain air. Behind him, the woods are alive, not with animals, but with something older, something without shape. I hear the twang of a bowstring and the rustle of branches that never seem to stop moving, even when the wind is still. Was he running from a man with cruel eyes, or from something that doesn't leave footprints? Perhaps we'll never know. But if you ever venture into those woods, Listen carefully. If you hear the soft snap of a twig behind you or feel the weight of unseen eyes, keep moving. And whatever you do, don't look back. Story 3. The Girl Who Fell from the Sky. The rain poured down in thick, grey sheets on the afternoon of December 24th, 1971, as Julianne Koepke and her mother boarded LANSA Flight 508 in Lima, Peru. The plane was small, the kind of aircraft that seemed to groan and shudder even on the clearest of days. But Julianne, only 17 years old, wasn't afraid. She was going home to Panguana, a research station buried deep in the Amazon rainforest, where her parents studied the mysteries of nature. Julianne loved the jungle. She had grown up there, her childhood defined by the constant hum of insects and the earthy smell of wet leaves. The rainforest had taught her to respect life in all its forms, from the smallest ant to the largest jaguar, but she did not yet know how much it would demand from her. The plane lifted off into storm clouds as thunder growled in the distance. Julianne glanced out the window, watching lightning fork across the sky. Her mother squeezed her hand. "Just a little turbulence," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed worry. Moments later, a blinding flash, a deafening crack, and then chaos. The plane lurched violently. The lights flickered and died. Passengers screamed as the cabin tore apart, fragments of metal and luggage spinning into the void. Julianne felt herself wrenched from her seat, still strapped in, her body tumbling end over end through open air. She remembered little after that, only a strange calm as the rainforest rushed up to meet her, the trees blurring into a green and brown mosaic. When she opened her eyes, it was quiet, eerily quiet. Julianne was lying on the forest floor, still strapped to her seat. Her head throbbed. One arm hung limply at her side, pain radiating from her shoulder. Her collarbone felt wrong, broken. Blood streaked her face where shards of glass had cut her, and yet she was alive. The others were not. The jungle around her seemed to breathe, its humid air pressing close. Somewhere nearby, flies buzzed thickly. She didn't dare investigate the source of the sound. Julianne staggered to her feet. Her school uniform, once crisp and clean, was now tattered and streaked with dirt. Her shoes were gone. For 9 days, she wandered. She followed small streams, remembering her father's advice. Water leads to people, but the water also led her deeper into the rainforest's tangled heart. The Amazon seemed alive in a way she had never known before. Trees loomed overhead like towering sentinels. Vines brushed her arms, clinging like curious fingers. Strange cries echoed through the canopy. Monkeys, birds, or perhaps something else. Something watching. At night, Julianne curled beneath the trees, trembling. The darkness was absolute. She could hear the skitter of insects and the slither of unseen creatures. The smell of decay hung thick in the air. Once she woke to feel something crawling in the wound on her arm. Maggots. She wanted to scream but didn't. Screaming would waste energy. Screaming would tell the jungle where she was. On the 10th day, weakened from hunger and dehydration, Julianne stumbled upon a small wooden hut. It looked abandoned, but it held a tin of gasoline. In a moment of desperate resolve, she poured the fuel into her wound to drive out the maggots. The pain was so intense that the world went white, and she collapsed. When she awoke, men were standing over her. Real men, not ghosts or hallucinations. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces a mix of awe and horror. Julianne was saved, but the jungle had not finished with her yet. She would later help search teams recover the bodies of her fellow passengers. The sight of her mother's lifeless form, half consumed by the forest, would stay with her forever. People called her survival a miracle. Scientists attributed it to her light frame, the seat cushioning her fall. Sheer luck. But deep down, Julianne wondered if something in the rainforest had allowed her to live. There are stories about spirits in the Amazon, ancient beings that watch over the land. Some are benevolent, guiding lost travelers to safety. Others are less forgiving. Perhaps, as she fell from the sky, one of those spirits caught her in invisible arms. Perhaps it whispered, "Not yet, not this one." Even now, decades later, Julianne dreams of the jungle. In her sleep, she hears the whisper of leaves and feels the humid air close around her like a living thing. And sometimes, she wakes with the sensation that she's still falling through endless green. Story 4. The Forgotten Skull in the Welsh Forest. It was a bitter November night in 2015 when two brothers, Andrew and Mark, set up camp deep in the Coed Wybrenin forest of northern Wales. The air was sharp and cold, and the ancient woods creaked in the wind like an old house settling into itself. They had come to watch the Wales Rally GB, an annual off-road car race that drew enthusiasts from across the country. But the brothers weren't just spectators, they wanted the full experience, camping out among the trees where the roar of engines would be their morning alarm. They gathered firewood, stacking dry branches into a makeshift pile. Sparks leaped into the night as their fire hissed and spat, throwing light onto the gnarled trunks around them. Beyond the glow, the forest was a black ocean of shifting shadows. Mark shivered and pulled his coat tighter. As the hours slipped by, their firewood dwindled. Mark volunteered to gather more. He grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the darkness, the beam slicing a narrow path through the undergrowth. The forest floor was damp, its mossy carpet muffling his steps. Twigs snapped beneath his boots, their sound swallowed almost instantly by the dense silence. Every tree seemed to look the same, tall, bare, and watching. "Andrew," Mark called, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm here. Just keep following my voice." Andrew called back from the campsite. His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it. Even the bravest hearts are wary of ancient woods after dark. The brothers called to each other every few moments, like players in a game of Marco Polo. Mark pressed on, bending to gather sticks that felt damp and soft in his gloved hands. But as he moved further from the firelight, he began to feel it, the prickle of eyes on his back. Then his flashlight swept across something pale in the dirt. At first, he thought it was a stone, but as the light steadied, a hollow socket stared back at him, a human skull, half buried in moss and soil, its grin wide and silent. Mark's breath hitched. "Oh my God," he whispered. Andrew heard him and immediately called back. "What? Mark, what's wrong?" "Jussie, come here. You need to see this." Moments later, Andrew appeared, his own flashlight trembling in his hand. When its beam landed on the skull, he froze. "Jesus Christ," Andrew muttered, his voice barely audible. The brothers didn't linger. They stumbled back to camp, their fire now a tiny island in a sea of black. Hands shaking, they dialed emergency services. By 9 p.m., police arrived with forensic teams, their bright lights casting harsh shadows over the clearing. Officers moved with quiet urgency, their boots crunching over leaves as they cordoned off the area. As the investigation unfolded, the brothers learned the truth, or at least part of it. The ground they decamped on had once been used as a dumping ground by a notorious serial killer. Peter Moore, the man in black, had murdered 4 men in the 1990s, burying their bodies in shallow woodland graves. The skull they discovered was believed to belong to a 5th victim, one never identified, whose disappearance had been swallowed by the passing years. Yet whispers among locals suggested something stranger. They spoke of restless spirits in the forest, men who had died violently and now lingered, searching for their stolen lives. Hunters claimed to hear footsteps pacing through the trees at night, accompanied by low, guttural murmurs. Some even swore they'd seen pale faces peering from behind tree trunks, vanishing the instant they looked directly. The brothers couldn't shake the memory of that cold night. In the months that followed, Mark dreamed of skeletal fingers clawing through the moss, reaching for his ankles. Andrew often woke to the sound of snapping twigs outside his window, though no one was ever there. When the wind howls through the Coed Brennan forest, the locals still warn travelers to stay on the paths. They say if you stray too far, you might hear whispers, and if you hear them, it's already too late. The forest remembers, and sometimes so do the dead. Story 5. The Black Bag in the English Woods. It was early summer when the woods near England lured me in with their gentle rustling leaves and cool shadows. I'd been on a long-distance run along the coastal roads, my feet pounding against the tarmac, until my water bottle ran dry and my legs began to ache. The sun was still high but starting to mellow, and the air smelled of salt and wildflowers. I wasn't from here. The names on the road signs, Sawmill Cove, Hope Cove, were unfamiliar to me, and my phone signal had disappeared somewhere around the last bend, but I wasn't worried. I could follow the road until it led me back to my parked car. Then it hit me. Not panic, but an altogether more ordinary sensation. I needed to relieve myself. The woods offered a brief reprieve. I darted off the road and climbed a small grassy verge, the shadows of the trees closing around me like a heavy curtain. Inside, it was cool and quiet, the air still. Only a few birds sang here, their calls strangely distant. As I stepped further in, I noticed it. A black plastic bag, crumpled and torn at the edges, lay half hidden beneath a thicket. Its shape was wrong, too large and too rigid to be garden waste. A sour, metallic scent hung in the air, curling into my nostrils and turning my stomach. I froze. In my head a voice whispered, "Don't look. Don't look closer. Turn around now." But I couldn't. Cautiously, I nudged the bag open with the toe of my running shoe. The first thing I saw was a pale curve of flesh, too pale to belong to any animal. Then hair. Human hair, matted and filthy. The smell struck me fully then, and I staggered back, choking on bile. It's a body, I thought. Someone dumped a body here. Stumbling out of the woods, I fumbled with my phone. By some miracle, a single bar of reception flickered to life. My fingers trembled as I dialed emergency services. When the police arrived, they moved with grim efficiency. Officers in high-visibility jackets cordoned off the area. A forensic team in white suits vanished into the woods. Their voices were low, urgent. Later, one of them told me the truth, or as much as they could. The victim was an elderly woman, reported missing weeks before. Her body had been cut into pieces, placed into bags, and left here like trash. But that wasn't the whole story. Locals whispered about the woods, about how they were different somehow. Hikers sometimes vanished for hours, only to reappear miles away with no memory of how they got there. Others reported strange noises, soft weeping, the snap of twigs when no one was near. One old man in the village pub leaned close and muttered to me, "That place, it doesn't like secrets. Anything buried there comes back up eventually." I didn't sleep well that night. In my dreams, I saw black bags rustling on their own. Something moved inside them, not with the stillness of death, but with the restless twitch of fingers seeking to escape. When I woke, my running shoes were still caked in mud from the woods, but there was something else. 2 tiny handprints in the dirt by my door, too small to belong to an adult, or maybe they weren't human at all. Story 6. The prisoner in the dark. In the dimly lit hallways of Florence Supermax, they whisper his name as though speaking it aloud might summon him. Thomas Silverstein. Some call him the most dangerous man ever to walk into an American prison. Others say he was a man swallowed whole by the darkness inside himself. But there are guards, old and grey now, who say the darkness didn't come from within. It came from somewhere else. Something that seeped through the cracks of his cell and settled into his bones like a parasite. Silverstein grew up in Long Beach, California, in a house full of rage and cruelty. His mother demanded vengeance whenever bullies hurt him. "You come home crying again," she warned, "and I'll give you worse than they ever did." So Thomas learned to fight, and with every blow, the boy inside him grew quieter. By 19, he was locked away in San Quentin for armed robbery. But prison didn't break him. It fed him. He became a soldier of the Aryan Brotherhood, earning his place by silencing a young man who had refused to smuggle heroin. They said Thomas slit his throat so cleanly the boy never had time to scream. But the killing didn't end there. When he was transferred to Marion Penitentiary in Illinois, he murdered again Robert Chappelle, a member of the DC Blacks gang. Word of the killing spread fast, and the DC Blacks sent their leader, Cadillac Smith, into Marion to exact revenge. What happened next is still debated by those who study prison law. Some say the guards arranged it, deliberately leaving Smith and Silverstein within reach of each other. Others say the two men were drawn together by something unseen, something hungry for blood. Silverstein struck first. He stabbed Smith over 60 times, leaving his body crumpled on the cold concrete. But it wasn't just the act of murder that chilled those who found the scene. It was Silverstein's calm. He dragged Smith's corpse up and down the block, showing it off like a trophy. Some guards swore his eyes didn't look human that day. Then came the killing of Officer Merle Klutz. Klutz had taunted Silverstein for months, tearing his paintings, mocking him during searches. The day Silverstein stabbed him to death in the hallway, other inmates claimed the lights flickered and a low, guttural sound, like laughter, echoed through the... After Klutz's death, the Bureau of Prisons made Silverstein vanish. They built a special cell for him, a glass box buried deep in Florence Supermax. He spent 23 hours a day there, alone. But was he really alone? Guards began reporting strange occurrences near Silverstein's cell. Whispers in the air vents, the feeling of being watched, even though the inmate was restrained behind layers of steel and glass. One rookie claimed he saw Thomas sitting cross-legged on his bed, speaking softly to the shadows in the corner. "Who's in there with you?" the guard asked. Silverstein smiled faintly. not who. What he spent 36 years in solitary confinement. No other inmate could have survived that long without going insane. Or perhaps he didn't survive it. Perhaps the thing in the shadows devoured what little humanity he had left. When Silverstein died in 2019, complications from heart surgery claimed him, or so they said. But an old prison nurse told a different story. She swore that as his heart monitor flatlined, the shadows in the room thickened and writhed, like smoke pulling itself into the shape of a man, and then it was gone. Some believe whatever haunted Silverstein still lingers in Florence Supermax, waiting for another mind to infect. Others say it's no longer contained within those concrete walls. They say it walks free now, unseen, moving from one violent soul to another. If you ever find yourself alone in the dark, and you hear a faint whisper calling your name, don't answer. It may already be too late. Story 7. The Monster of Wakefield Prison. When you hear the word monster, you might picture claws, teeth, and glowing eyes. But sometimes monsters walk on 2 feet, with human faces and calm voices. They pass through our world quietly until the darkness inside them leaks out, poisoning everything they touch. Robert Maudsley was one such monster. Born in Liverpool in 1953, Maudsley's childhood was an unending nightmare of hunger and violence. Social workers placed him in an orphanage when he was young, but his father won custody back and brought him home. It was there, behind closed doors, that the true horror began. Beatings, starvation, and worse, things Maudsley would never speak of aloud. By his teenage years, Maudsley had fled Liverpool for London. He worked as a male escort to feed his growing addiction to drugs, and he haunted the city's backstreets like a restless ghost. But the voices never left him. They whisper in my head, he once told a psychiatrist. They tell me to kill, to cleanse. The doctor dismissed it as delusion. But soon, those whispers became reality. In 1974, Maudsley met a man named John Farrell. Farrell invited him back to his flat, but once inside, Maudsley discovered a stack of photographs, images of children, terrified and broken. Farrell laughed as he boasted about his collection. Something inside Maudsley snapped. He strangled Farrell with his own scarf, then calmly walked to the police station and turned himself in. "Lock me up," he said. "I can't stop." At Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, staff thought they could treat him, but Maudsley wasn't seeking treatment. He was hunting. There, he befriended another patient, a convicted child abuser named David Francis. 4 weeks, Maudsley smiled and shared cigarettes with him, earning his trust. One morning, Maudsley lured Francis into his cell and locked the door behind him. For 9 hours, he tortured the man. When guards finally broke in, Francis's body was barely recognizable. After that, Maudsley was sent to Wakefield Prison. He was placed in solitary confinement, but it wasn't enough. In 1978, Maudsley killed 2 more prisoners in the same day. He garroted one with a length of wire and lured the other into his cell before stabbing him to death. The most chilling detail came later. Guards found Maudsley sitting cross-legged on his bed, humming softly. The second victim's head had been cracked open, and something had been removed. Rumors spread that Maudsley had eaten a piece of his victim's brain. The press dubbed him Hannibal the Cannibal, but prisoners whispered another name for him, the Soul Eater. They claimed Maudsley wasn't just killing for revenge. He was feeding something inside him, something old and hungry. Wakefield built a special glass cell just for him, like the cage in Silence of the Lambs. He lived there alone, 23 hours a day. Guards passed food through a small slot in the door. They said he never raised his voice, never begged for mercy. But sometimes at night, they heard him talking, not to himself, to someone or something that wasn't there. In 2000, Maudsley asked for cyanide to end his life. The prison refused. He then begged for a pet bird, claiming he needed a soul to talk to. The request was denied, and so he waits in his glass box, eyes sharp and unblinking. Some say he's still listening to the whispers. Others believe he's no longer human, but something worse, a vessel for the thing that lurks in the quiet spaces between thought and action. If you ever visit Wakefield Prison, don't go near the basement. Don't listen for the soft, melodic humming, and above all, don't lock eyes with the man in the glass cell, because if you do, you might feel it, the pull of something vast and ancient, something that watches through his eyes and waits for you to make a mistake. Story 8. The Hunters in the Woods. It was the summer of 1997 when my world changed forever. I was 12 years old, a girl growing up in the quiet, wooded suburbs of Connecticut, and I was living every child's dream. For my birthday that year, my parents gave me a pony. His name was Custard, a gentle Cremello Welsh pony, with a golden mane that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. I loved him instantly. That summer, we rode nearly every day through grassy meadows, across creeks, and under the shadowed canopies of ancient oaks. It felt like freedom. Every Saturday, my mother and I would venture further afield on horseback. She rode her prized Andalusian stallion, always leading the way while I trotted behind on Custard. She promised that someday, when I was ready, I could take the lead. One afternoon, she finally nodded and said, "Go on, sweetheart. Show me what you've learned." I was thrilled. I nudged Custard into a gentle canter, his hooves thudding softly against the forest trail. Sunlight filtered through the trees in golden shafts, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. For the first time, I felt like a real explorer, lost in a world of my own. But I didn't notice how quiet it had become. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just the rhythmic beat of Custard's hooves and my own excited breathing. I should have turned back. Instead, I pressed on, unaware of the eyes, watching us from the underbrush. The shot came without warning. A deafening crack split the air, and Custard screamed, a sound so raw and unnatural it haunts me even now. In an instant, his legs buckled, and we crashed to the ground. Pain shot through my leg as it twisted beneath his weight. I tried to crawl free, but I was pinned. That's when I saw him. A man stepped out from the trees, a rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was pale and expressionless, his eyes dark and empty. "I thought it was a deer," he muttered. His voice was hollow, almost mechanical. I screamed for my mother. Somewhere behind me, I heard her frantic shouts and the pounding of her horse's hooves. When she arrived, the man backed away slowly, vanishing into the shadows. The authorities later ruled it an accident. Hunters get confused sometimes, they said. He didn't mean it. But my mother didn't believe them, and neither did I. Custard had been wearing a bright blue saddle pad. His mane was golden. He didn't look like any deer, and there was something about the man's eyes, flat and glassy, like he wasn't really seeing me at all. That night, as I lay in bed with my leg in a cast, I swore I could hear the sound of leaves crunching outside my window. When I looked, there was no one there, but deep in the woods, something moved. Story 9. The Woods That Breathe. The woods near Plymouth, in the southwest of England, had always called to me. As a long-distance runner, I loved their winding trails and salty sea air. But on that warm June afternoon, something felt different, heavier somehow, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. I had just passed the 10th kilometer mark when I realized I'd taken a wrong turn. Instead of looping back toward my parked car, I found myself running deeper into unfamiliar territory. Signs pointed toward a small village called Sawmill Cove. I figured I'd stop there, ask for directions, and grab some water. But before I reached the village, nature called in a more urgent way. A wooded area just off the road seemed perfect. I darted in, moving quickly between the trees, their trunks standing like silent sentinels in the late afternoon light. That's when I noticed it. A large black bin bag lay crumpled beneath a tree, its plastic shiny and taut in places, as though something heavy and misshapen filled it. At first, I thought it was rubbish, someone fly-tipping their household waste, but the smell hit me before I got closer. It wasn't garbage, it was the smell of decay. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed for me to leave, but curiosity pulled me forward. Gently, with the tip of my shoe, I nudged the bag open. What I saw will never leave me. A pale, lifeless hand protruded from the torn plastic, fingers stiff, nails cracked and dark with dried blood. The smell grew stronger, and bile rose in my throat. I staggered backward, gasping for air. My phone shook in my hand as I called emergency services. By the time the police arrived, the sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long, skeletal shadows across the forest floor. Officers in high-visibility jackets cordoned off the area. A forensic team in white suits moved in, their voices low and urgent. They told me later the victim was a woman in her 60s, reported missing weeks earlier. Her body had been cut into pieces and stuffed into bags like trash. But the locals whispered a different story. They said the woods were old, older than the village, older than memory. People who ventured too far in sometimes didn't come out the same. Some came back hours later, unable to recall where they'd been. Others returned, speaking of whispers in the trees and pale faces watching from the shadows. The police didn't believe those stories, but I did, because when I emerged from the woods that day, I felt different. That night, I dreamed of the forest, of the bag, and in the dream, the bag wasn't still. It moved. Something inside it was trying to get out. Story 10. The Man Who Spoke to Shadows. In the dim corridors of America's most notorious prisons, his name became a warning whispered between guards. Thomas Silverstein. Some called him a madman. Others said he was more than that, something unholy that the concrete walls could barely contain. Born in Long Beach in 1952, Silverstein's life was steeped in violence from the beginning. His mother taught him not to cry when beaten, to fight back harder instead. By his teens, he had learned the rules of survival in a world where only the cruelest thrived. He was sent to prison at 19 for armed robbery, and there, behind cold steel bars, he didn't just adapt. Silverstein became a soldier for the Aryan Brotherhood, carving a reputation with blood. He killed without hesitation, earning his place by slashing a man's throat so fast the victim couldn't scream. But the murders didn't stop. At Marion Penitentiary, he butchered Robert Chappelle, a rival gang member, then later stabbed Cadillac Smith, leader of the DC Blacks, over 60 times. Guards claimed the block's lights flickered during the attack. One even swore he heard a sound, like laughter, that came from nowhere. It was after the death of a correctional officer, Merle Klutz, that Silverstein was sealed away in solitary confinement. The Bureau of Prisons had no other choice. They built him a cell like no other. A glass box buried deep in Florence Supermax. He lived there alone for 23 hours a day, watched from behind thick barriers. But he wasn't alone. Guards began to notice strange things in the corridors near his cell. Whispers rising from the air vents. Shadows that didn't move with the light. One rookie claimed he saw Silverstein sitting cross-legged on his bed, talking softly to the darkness. "Who are you speaking to?" the guard asked. Silverstein only smiled. "Not who," he whispered. "What?" He stayed in that box for 36 years, until his death in 2019. But when the monitor flatlined, nurses claimed the shadows in his room seemed to coil and writhe, like smoke taking shape before vanishing into thin air. Some believe the thing that haunted Silverstein wasn't destroyed. It's still out there, drifting from one violent soul to the next. If you ever feel someone watching you in a dark room, and a soft voice calls your name, don't answer. It might not be your imagination, it might be him. Story 11. The Campfire Beneath the Pines. It was November 2015 when two brothers, Andrew and Mark, set up camp deep in the Coed Y Brennan Forest of northern Wales. The air was sharp and cold, heavy with the scent of pine and earth. Around them, ancient trees loomed like sentinels, their twisted branches reaching for the sky. The brothers were there for the Wales Rally GB, their tent pitched close enough to hear the growl of engines the next morning. As night fell, they built a fire, its flickering light dancing against the blackness of the woods. But the forest seemed restless that night. The wind sighed through the trees in strange, mournful tones, and unseen creatures rustled in the undergrowth. By midnight, their pile of firewood had dwindled. Mark grabbed a flashlight and trudged into the woods to gather more, leaving Andrew behind to stoke the flames. The forest closed around him as he walked. The beam of his flashlight cut narrow paths through the darkness, revealing mossy roots and damp leaves. Every tree looked the same, and soon Mark realized he couldn't see the glow of their campfire anymore. "Andrew," he called. "I'm here," came the distant reply. Mark followed the sound of his brother's voice, relief washing over him. But as he took another step, his flashlight swept over something pale in the dirt. At first, he thought it was a rock, but as the beam steadied, a hollow socket stared back at him, a human skull, half buried beneath moss and soil. "Oh my God," Mark breathed. Andrew heard the panic in his voice and shouted back, "What is it? Just come here. You need to see this." Moments later, Andrew arrived, his own flashlight trembling in his hand. When its light fell on the skull, he froze. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. They didn't linger. Together, they stumbled back to their campsite, their fire now a lonely island in an endless sea of darkness. With shaking hands, they dialed the police. By 9 p.m., officers arrived and cordoned off the area. Forensic teams in white suits combed the forest, their voices low and urgent. Later, the brothers learned the truth. or at least part of it. The skull belonged to an unknown victim, likely buried there by Peter Moore, a serial killer who had terrorized the region decades earlier. But no one could say for certain. Locals whispered other theories. They spoke of spirits in the forest, restless souls bound to the earth where they had died. Some hikers claimed to hear soft footsteps following them at night, accompanied by faint, mournful whispers. Others swore they had seen pale faces peering from behind the trees. The brothers couldn't shake the memory. In the weeks that followed, Mark dreamed of skeletal fingers clawing through the moss, reaching for his ankles. Andrew often woke in the night to the sound of leaves crunching outside his window. The police dismissed it as imagination, but deep down, the brothers knew better. The forest doesn't forget. Story 12. The Whispering Creek. It was late autumn when I stumbled upon the place they call Hollow Creek. I hadn't planned to be there. My GPS sent me down a narrow dirt road fringed with skeletal trees, their bare branches clawing at the grey sky. I was driving to visit an old friend in a remote part of West Virginia, but something felt wrong the moment I turned off the main highway. The road seemed too quiet, too still. Even the birds were absent. I'd been driving for nearly half an hour when I spotted it, an old wooden bridge crossing a narrow stream. It looked ancient, weathered boards, slick with moss. The water beneath it flowed lazily, but its surface rippled as though something unseen moved just below. I stopped the car, unsure why. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the faint sound I thought I heard, a soft murmur, like a voice calling from beneath the bridge. I stepped out, the chill air biting through my jacket. "Huh?" I called, though I wasn't sure why. The murmur stopped. I leaned over the bridge's railing. The water was dark, reflecting nothing but grey sky. And then I saw it, a pale hand breaking the surface, fingers curled as though reaching for mine. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. When I looked again, the water was still. No hand, no ripples, just the slow trickle of the creek. I told myself I was imagining things. That stress and hunger had made me see what wasn't there. But as I turned to leave, I heard it again, a whisper carried on the wind. "Help me." The voice was faint, childlike. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed for me to get in my car and drive. But something about the voice tugged at me. I knelt down and peered into the water again. A pale face stared back, hollow eyes, mouth open in a soundless scream. I fell backward and scrambled for the car. When I finally started the engine and sped away, the air seemed to grow heavier, pressing against the car windows like unseen hands. Later, I told my friend about what I saw. He grew pale. "You went to Hollow Creek?" he asked. "Locals say the spirits of drowned children haunt that place. They call out to travelers, begging to be saved. And if you reach for them," his voice faltered, "they pull you in." That night, as I lay awake in his guest room, I swore I heard it again. A faint knock on the window, and a whisper, "Help me." Story 13. The Figures by the Roadside. It was late one evening. I found myself driving along a narrow stretch of road in rural Idaho. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving only the glow of my headlights to pierce the darkness. Fields of wild grass flanked either side, swaying gently in the cold night air. I'd been driving for hours, my eyelids heavy. The road ahead stretched on like an endless black ribbon, and there wasn't another car in sight. Even my radio had lost signal miles back. That's when I saw them, 2 figures standing by the roadside. At first, I thought they were hitchhikers, a man and a woman, dressed in clothes that looked oddly out of place, like something from another time. The man wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and the woman clutched what seemed to be an old-fashioned parasol. I slowed the car, hesitating. Something felt wrong. They didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there, staring as I approached. Their faces were pale, almost glowing in the light from my headlights, but their eyes, dark, hollow voids, didn't reflect the light at all. A chill crawled down my spine. I didn't stop. As I passed, I glanced in the rearview mirror. They were gone. The roadside was empty, the tall grass swaying gently as though nothing had disturbed it. My breath quickened. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tight enough to make my knuckles ache. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. The same 2 figures, standing by the road ahead. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching against the asphalt. It wasn't possible. They stood exactly as before. The man in his long coat, the woman with her parasol, unmoving. This time, I didn't slow. I hit the accelerator and sped past them. My heart thudded in my ears as the car jolted over uneven patches of road. When I dared to look in the mirror again, they weren't there. But I swear I heard something, a faint tapping sound, like fingers drumming against glass. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town. When I told the local gas station attendant what I'd seen, he went pale. "You've been on Devil's Hollow Road," he said. "There used to be a farmhouse out there, burned down in the 30s. A man killed his wife, then himself, right by the road." He leaned in closer. "People say their spirits still linger. They try to flag down passing cars, but if you stop for them..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Don't ever stop." That night, in my motel room, I couldn't sleep, because outside my window, in the glow of the parking lot lights, I saw them again, standing still, waiting. Story 14. The Thing in the Walls. When I first moved into the old farmhouse, I thought I'd found a hidden gem. It sat on the edge of a quiet Pennsylvania town, surrounded by acres of tall grass and whispering trees. The rent was cheap, the air smelled clean, and the creaking wooden floors felt charming. At first, the landlord was eager to hand me the keys. "Just don't mind the noises at night," he said with a nervous chuckle. "Old wood has a way of settling." The first night, I heard it, a faint scratching sound inside the walls. At first, I thought it was mice. I knocked on the plaster and listened, but the sound stopped immediately, as if whatever was there was holding its breath. The scratching returned the next night, louder, closer. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound moved slowly along the walls, circling the room. I held my breath as it crept toward the head of my bed. Silence. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But the following evening, as I read in the living room, I heard a low whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it came again. Soft, breathy words sliding through the cracks in the walls. "Let me out," I froze. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Let me out." I stumbled backward, knocking over my glass of water. The sound stopped. The next morning, I called a handyman. "I think there's an animal stuck in the walls," I said, forcing a laugh. He came by that afternoon, tapping along the walls with a wrench. "Doesn't sound hollow," he muttered. Strange. When he pried open a section of plaster, we both recoiled at the stench. Something was inside, but it wasn't an animal. We found a small, bricked-up cavity between the walls. In it lay the skeletal remains of a child, curled into a fetal position. Its hands were pressed against the bricks, fingers splayed as if trying to push through. The handyman went pale. "You need to call the police," he said. The officers arrived within the hour. One of them, an older man with tired eyes, shook his head as he examined the remains. "This isn't the first time," he murmured. "Years ago, children went missing around here. The house was owned by a man who..." He didn't finish the sentence. That night, I slept at a hotel, but even there, I couldn't escape it. At 3:07 a.m., I woke to the sound of faint scratching and a whisper. "Let me out." Story 15. The Black Dog of Dartmoor. There's an old legend in Devon, England, about a creature that roams the moors after dark. They call it the Black Dog, a massive, shadowy beast with glowing red eyes and jaws that drip with foam. Some say it's a demon, others whisper that it is the restless spirit of a hound sacrificed in some forgotten ritual centuries ago. I never believed those stories, not until the night I saw it myself. It was autumn, and the air on Dartmoor was sharp with the smell of wet leaves and peat. I'd taken a job delivering supplies to farms scattered across the moors. That evening, my last delivery had kept me out later than planned. By the time I set off for home, the sun had sunk below the horizon, leaving only a faint orange glow in the distance. The road ahead twisted like a snake, lined with gnarled trees whose branches clawed at the starless sky. My headlights cut narrow tunnels through the darkness, but they seemed too weak, too small against the vastness of the moor. Then I saw it, a shape on the road ahead. At first, I thought it was a large dog, but as I drew closer, I realized how wrong I was. It was massive, larger than any wolf, its black fur slick and bristling. Its eyes glowed a deep, hellish red, and its lips curled back in a snarl, revealing rows of impossibly sharp teeth. The creature didn't move as I approached. It just stood there, staring. A deep growl reverberated in my chest like distant thunder. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the cold tarmac. The car came to a shuddering halt just meters away. The beast didn't flinch. I fumbled for the gear shift, ready to reverse, but then it leapt, so fast my eyes could barely follow. Its enormous body vanished into the gorse bushes beside the road. For a moment, all was silent. Then I heard it. The sound of claws scraping across the car's roof. I froze, too terrified to breathe. The scraping stopped. When I finally found the courage to look up, I saw nothing. No shadow, no glowing eyes. But as I drove away, heart pounding, I swore I felt something heavy watching me from the darkened head. When I told the story later at a pub in Tavistock, the locals went quiet. An old man leaned forward, his face pale. "You're lucky," he said. "Most who see the black dog don't live to tell the tale." "It's an omen." "An omen of what?" I asked. "Death." I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the chill in my bones. But that night, as I lay in bed, I dreamed of glowing red eyes staring at me from the foot of my bed, and in the silence, I heard a low, rumbling growl. Story 16. The lighthouse that watches. On the rugged coast of Maine stands an abandoned lighthouse, battered by wind and salt, its beacon long extinguished. Locals call it Widow's Reach. Few speak of it openly, and even fewer dare to approach it after dark. They say something still lives in the tower, something that never left when the light went out. I first heard about Widow's Reach while researching forgotten maritime structures for a photography project. Old sea charts showed it active until 1952, then suddenly decommissioned without explanation. No official closure records, no mention in local archives, just silence. Naturally, I had to see it. The trail there was overgrown and treacherous, winding through sharp rocks and stubborn shrubs. The lighthouse appeared slowly as I crested a hill, tall, whitewashed stone streaked with age, its lantern room shattered like a blind eye, staring toward the ocean. Despite the wind howling inland, the air around the tower felt unnaturally still. Even the seagulls stayed away. I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight. The air smelled of mildew and salt. Graffiti covered the walls, most of it crude, but some symbols were strange, circles and lines that didn't resemble any language I knew. A spiral staircase led upward, winding like a serpent into the shadows. I climbed slowly, each step creaking like a whisper. At the top, I found the lantern room gutted and rusted, but someone, or something, had placed a chair in the center of the room, facing the sea. And in that chair sat a man, or what remained of one. He was dressed in a faded keeper's uniform, skin pale and tight against his bones. His head lolled forward, hands resting on his knees. I stepped closer, unsure if he was real. Then he moved. Not a twitch or spasm, but a deliberate raising of his chin. His eyes opened. They were clouded, white as sea foam, but they locked onto mine with terrifying clarity. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. I stumbled back, heart pounding. "You left the light off," he whispered. "They'll come." I ran, down the stairs, through the warped door, into the wind. I didn't stop until I reached my car, lungs burning. Later, when I told the local historical society what I saw, they stared in stunned silence. "There hasn't been a keeper there since 1952, one woman said. "He died in that tower. Heart failure," they say, another leaned in. "He used to talk to the ocean, said it whispered secrets when the fog rolled in." That night, I developed the photos I took in the lantern room. In one frame, I saw the man in the chair. In the next, he was gone. But outside the tower, in the grey mist, a dozen pale figures stood watching me. Story 17. The Sound in the Cornfield. In the summer of 2004, I took a job as a farmhand in Iowa. The fields stretched endlessly in every direction, seas of green corn swaying under the heavy sky. It was quiet work, peaceful, even until Anaya heard the sound. The farmer had warned me. "Don't go out to the fields after dark," he said, his face grey. "If you hear music, don't follow it, no matter what." I thought he was joking. That first week, the days passed uneventfully. I fixed fences, hauled bales of hay, and learned the rhythm of the place. At night, I sat on the porch with a book, the crickets and cicadas providing a soothing soundtrack. Then one evening, as I lay in bed, I heard it, a faint tune carried on the warm breeze. It sounded like a music box, soft, delicate, impossibly out of place. I sat up, straining to hear. The melody seemed to come from the cornfield just beyond the barn. Something about it drew me in. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The air was thick and still, the stars hidden behind a veil of clouds. As I approached the cornfield, the music grew louder. The stalks swayed gently, though there was no wind. I paused at the edge of the rows, the beam of my flashlight barely cutting into the darkness. "Hala!" I called. The music stopped. Then a whisper came from deep within the field. "This way." Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I didn't. I stepped between the stalks, the leaves brushing my arms like cold fingers. The dirt path wound deeper and deeper until I lost sight of the barn lights. The whisper came again. "This way." Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. The music returned, louder now, almost frantic. I turned to leave, but couldn't find the path I'd taken. The stalks shifted around me, closing in. Panic gripped me as I stumbled forward, hands outstretched. The music grew deafening, twisting into a distorted wail. Then I saw them, pale figures standing between the rows. Their faces were wrong, too long, their mouths stretched into grotesque smiles. They swayed to the tune, their arms outstretched. "Dance with us," they whispered. I ran. I don't know how long I fled through that maze of stalks, but eventually I burst out of the field, gasping for air. The barn lights glowed faintly in the distance. When I looked back, the cornfield was still. The music was gone. The next morning, the farmer found me on the porch, pale and trembling. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He sighed. "They call it the Piper. He's been here longer than any of us." "Did anyone ever—" I hesitated. "Not come back?" The farmer didn't answer. But later, as I packed my things to leave, I noticed something in the dirt near the field. A small, rusted music box. Its lid was open, and it was still playing.